Hello, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I'm here to do another round of recent reads talking about 5 of the horror books I have read in the last few months. All that being said, as always, let's get straight into the books. First, I read Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones, and this was the February pick for the Books in the Freezer book club. And if you're interested in reading a horror book every month, I'll leave information to the Goodreads group so you can read along with us. But this is one I definitely picked up because it was part of the book club, because I knew that it was about werewolves, which honestly aren't my favorite kind of horror creature. And I also knew that this was more of a literary book, which isn't normally my kind of flavor when it comes to horror. I do prefer more action-driven stories. And that was kind of my takeaway from this book. I listened to it on audio, which was a really good way to consume it. I thought the audio narration was great. And if I had read a physical copy, I'm not sure if I would have gotten through this. The writing is really well done. He is a fantastic writer, but it just lacked plot in my opinion, and I just didn't really care for the characters enough to get hooked into the story. This story almost reads like a collection of short stories with kind of each chapter telling a little story in and of itself. And it just, again, wasn't the kind of horror I like to read, but I know other people like Stephanie from That's What She Read really enjoyed this one. So if you do enjoy more literary style of horror, you might really enjoy this one, even if you don't normally read or enjoy werewolf stories. But for me, it just lacked plot, honestly, and it was just a little bit forgettable in my mind. Next, I read The Dark Beneath the Ice, which is a YA horror novel about a teenage girl whose parents are going through a messy divorce. She herself is having her own struggles because she notices that she is blacking out, forgetting things, and she is getting accused of breaking objects, and she just doesn't remember doing it. So she's starting to wonder, is she having a mental breakdown? Or perhaps is she possessed? If you know me, you know that I love a good possession story, so this one very much interested me, even though it is YA. The story involves her teaming up with another teenage girl who's the daughter of a psychic in order to figure out what's going on, potentially exorcise whatever is inside of her, and the story goes from there. I love the premise of this story, especially because it has a first-person perspective on a possible possession. That's my favorite way to consume these possession stories, and I was very excited, hoping it would be similar to Come Closer by Sarah Gran, which I've gushed about on my channel numerous times. Unfortunately, I feel like this one was a little bit forgettable. The plot kind of plodded along, and I was just never very gripped into the story. And I'd say that the writing just didn't really work for me. It's very descriptive, and it got to the point that I just never felt fully connected. It felt very standoffish the way it was written, that you just never really got immersed in the story or close to the characters. It does have a fantastic lesbian angle to it. There is a potential relationship between these two girls, and you also have the one girl coming out to one of her parents in a very positive way. And so if you're looking for queer horror, I would recommend this, but as a possession story, I thought it was a little bit lackluster, and there's ones that I would definitely recommend before reading this one. So not my favorite, but again, I did appreciate that it actually had some diverse representation, which isn't always at the forefront of horror novels. After that, I read A Haunting, The Horror on Rue Lane by L.I. Albemont, and this I read on audio. This is the story of a woman who is going through a messy divorce and decides to get away, move back to the hometown where her mother was from. She ends up buying an old house, and well, surprise, it turns out to be potentially haunted. And I almost need to stop reading haunted house stories, at least these really classic ones, because I just found this story to be very generic. It's very much a classic haunted house story, and I just wanted something that would surprise me. I wanted a twist or a turn, and it was just so easy to predict what was going to happen. So it wasn't bad, but it was just average at best. I read it as an audiobook, and the narration was really good, which is the reason I finished it, but was just very forgettable for me. So I'd really like to know if anyone has any recommendations for haunted house stories that just kind of break the mold and are a little bit more unexpected, something with like a twist or a turn. Love some recommendations down below because I am so tired of reading the same haunted house story over and over again. I read way too much horror to keep reading the same story over and over again. It's driving me absolutely nuts. And then I read Witch Hunter, Gods and Monsters by J.Z. Foster. This is one I actually received an e-copy from the author for review. And if you don't remember, this is the sequel to a book I gushed about last year called The Witch Hunter Into the Outside. And this particular follow-up novel follows the same witch hunter, Richard, who is kind of unexpectedly thrown into the role of hunting down urban creatures, and the story is just so much fun. This is horror in the fact that it has some very dark and gruesome moments, but in a lot of ways it does read more like urban fantasy. And I don't want to give away too much of the plot. It is a book you could start with this one, but I personally recommend going back and starting with the first book, Into the Outside, just because it's such a good story. It really sets up who Richard is as a witch hunter and basically how he fell into this role. What I like so much about the story is the humor. Particularly in this last volume, there is one character that is just hilarious and there's just so much witty banter going on, and I just found so many moments where I was cracking a smile or chuckling to myself while reading, which isn't something I do a lot when I read. So really enjoy the humor. It's more of a satire on the witch hunting genre, if you will. And it just doesn't take itself too seriously, which is something that's really nice because I do read a lot of horror. So horror that kind of makes fun of itself is just a lot of fun. Personally, I felt the story felt a little bit long. It's only 400 pages, but I could have had it be a little bit shorter just because it is satirical. Eventually, I was ready for the story to wrap up, but regardless, it was funny, it was fun, and I would definitely read more into the series if the author continues to write it. So really one I enjoy, probably one of my favorite of the books I'm going to mention here. And finally, I want to mention one horror manga, and that is Ibitsu. And this follows a young man who is walking back to his apartment when he comes across this really creepy girl, and he accidentally invites her into his life and apartment as his younger sister. And from there, she goes and basically causes havoc in his life. She sneaks in and all sorts of things ensue. This is a horror manga with a lot of gory content. There's a lot of body horror. I do need to give trigger warnings for self-harm and cutting. And I really enjoy those body horror elements. I found it gruesome and just stomach turning and all those good things that I like. However, my main complaint with the story is that it was very simplistic in terms of the plot. I felt there wasn't much in terms of twists or turns. It very much was a creepy girl who gets into his apartment and does creepy things. And I just wanted a little bit more from the story. It's actually a fairly long manga, and I just didn't really think that it did a lot with the number of pages that it had. So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the body horror, but I was kind of ready for it to be done before it was finished because it just didn't really surprise me. So those are all the horror books I want to talk about in this video. I'm noticing a little bit of a theme, and that's the fact that I'm really on the lookout for horror that is a little bit surprising, a little bit different. I've said before, but I read so much horror these days that I just need something new. And so if you have any recommendations for horror, whether it be haunted house or other kind of stories that are just a little bit outside of the norm, I would love recommendations. I think part of the reason I like the satire so much, The Witch Hunter, was simply because it was different. It was making fun of the horror genre and just not doing the same thing over and over again. So love recommendations down below. Otherwise, hope you're having a good one. I will talk to you again soon in another video. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye-bye.